Hey everybody, welcome to episode 69 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back, welcome aboard. The hiatus is over and we are officially beginning season 4. A lot of things have happened in the 5 months since we've been doing this show, one of which is Erica and I have moved. So instead of recording this intro from her closet, I am sitting in our super cool cricket-infested backyard. So if there is a low hum of crickets in the background, that is where they're coming from. I also made sure not to squander those months, so we have already recorded half of this season. And if you've never gone to our website, cogetoutside.com, you should definitely go check it out. We have completely redesigned it, and for the first time, it is easy to navigate through all of the past episodes. We have multiple ways for you to pick and choose how you want to find the episodes. You can sort them by season, by topic. It is easy to navigate from one episode to the other. So now I would say that the website is the number one best place to consume the show. We have improved and updated the individual show posts, and we are incorporating more media. So expect a better presentation of all the information, all the links, all the photographs from our guests, but then also any videos and other media will be included in a much more enjoyable manner than in the past. But that is enough about the podcast as a whole. Let's talk about today's show. We will be speaking with Beth Pratt-Bergstrom. She is the executive director of the California chapter of the National Wildlife Federation, and she also leads the Save LA Cougars campaign, which is working to build a wildlife crossing over the 101 freeway in Los Angeles. I would describe Beth as an extremely practical and grounded person who is actively finding beneficial solutions so that nature and humans can coexist. One of the things I appreciate about Beth is that she is one of those people who is more interested in inspiring people so that they learn to care instead of beating them over the head with polemics and fright tactics. So let's start off this season talking about urban wildlife with Beth Pratt-Bergstrom.
Hi, my name is Beth Pratt-Bergstrom. I am a lifelong advocate for wildlife and also someone who just worships being in the outdoors. I've worked in places like Yellowstone and Yosemite, but also enjoy nature everywhere, even in cities like Los Angeles, where there's more nature than people think. My current role is the Regional Executive Director for California for the National Wildlife Federation, and I lead the Save LA Cougars campaign, which is to build a wildlife crossing, the biggest in the world, to help save a population of mountain lions from extinction, but also to help all wildlife in an urban area, which to some people is like, what, there's wildlife in cities? So I have the best job in the world, but personally just make sure I'm outdoors anytime I can be.
So I think the first thing we should probably do for everyone is make sure they know what the National Wildlife Federation is and why they should care about what it is.
Most people know Ranger Rick. I grew up reading Ranger Rick. A lot of generation my age did. A lot of grandparents give Ranger Rick a magazine for gifts. So most people might know the National Wildlife Federation as Ranger Rick. But it's one of the oldest and largest conservation groups. It's over 80 years old. We have 6 million supporters nationwide. What I like about it is it's very much a big tent. You can have vegan, animal rights, progressive people like me in it, but you also have NRA members who, have a very different approach to the way we do things here in California. But on the other hand, we all come together to find common ground for people and wildlife. That is one of the things that excites me because, as we know, especially in this current climate, there's not enough of that happening right now. The National Wildlife Federation obviously is a conservation group, and we work a lot on wildlife issues, from releasing bison back to tribal lands to cleaning up the Gulf when the big oil spill happened, to the Great Lakes, looking at how cleaning up that environment as well. But we also do a lot with connecting people and especially children to nature through our school programs, educational publications like Ranger Rick. But I actually think the best thing we do that really makes a difference for both conservation as people is we have this certification certified wildlife habitat program. And we have all this free education about what you can do in your own backyard to help wildlife. Planting native plants, putting in a bird bath, putting in a bat house, all these things that both help people because you're increasing your green space in your backyard or schoolyard or business, or even, you don't even need a yard. You can do this on an apartment balcony. So you're bringing more green into your own life, which studies have shown provide great benefits to you. But also you're creating habitat for wildlife that was taken away. It's easy to do, it's accessible, and we have over 200,000 nationwide. That becomes a conservation success story that every citizen can participate in.
And you are the director for this region, correct? So is that specifically California or the Southwest or Western U.S.?
So I'm the regional executive director for California. We have 7 regions nationwide, and I'm the only region that is one state, but I'm the biggest region. And of course, it's California. It's a nation state, right?
So how did you get involved with that? Were you a kid that grew up already immersed in this, or is this something you came upon later in life? How do you go from little bitty Beth to Beth that is now the regional director for California?
It's a good question that I ask a lot of people too, because obviously my job is to get people connected to the outdoors and to wildlife. So I'm always interested how they came to it. And I think most people who are in this work or who just love the outdoors or wildlife, most of them answer they got it from their parents. And I am no different. My parents loved to be outside. I wouldn't say they were athletic. It's not like they were outside doing really strenuous things, but we would go whale watching on Cape Cod. We'd walk on the beach a lot. We had local woods, Carlisle State Forest. We used to go to every weekend and take the dog, and we would walk the trails. So I just had a childhood, very lucky childhood, and what I want for all kids, no matter where they grow up, whether it's LA or a rural area, I just had a childhood of outdoors, and my parents were also like animals, so that's where I got from them. I think I also got it though from watching things like Born Free and Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which really connected me to wildlife that I didn't have, because obviously in suburban Massachusetts in 1970s, the best I could hope for was a squirrel or frogs. It's interesting to me that wildlife was starting to come back, and where I grew up now has coyotes and deer, which did not exist when I was growing up. But the best I could hope for back then was frogs and squirrels. So watching these shows about lions and wildlife in Yellowstone really inspired me. So it just was about getting to this role, which is really the role of a lifetime, just being true to my values, which is working in this field. I have a biology field undergrad. Although I'm not a typical tree hugger, I also have an MBA. So it's always been for me about how do we make change in the world work in the context of our capitalistic system, because for better or for worse, that's what we got. And just always took jobs that had a value system attached to it, even if I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the country and also nonprofits. So I've switched back and forth. And it's just been about making sure that whatever job I took, whether it be for nonprofit or business, had that value system of the environment and wildlife attached to it. After working in Yellowstone and Yosemite, I was lucky enough to be selected for this job.
So what kind of work were you doing before when you were in Yellowstone and Yosemite?
Yellowstone, I was the director of sustainability for the concessionaire there, because we think of national parks as these pristine areas and it's wilderness. However, there's also small cities within them. I mean, anybody who's been to Yosemite Valley knows there's 3 hotels and this many restaurants, and it's the same in Yellowstone. So my job was to ensure that everything was sustainable and green. So, if there was remodeling being done in the hotels, had to be green. Was the seafood sourced sustainably? When I worked there, we did some really cool green energy projects that the employee proposed. One was we started taking the fryer oil from the restaurants and using it to heat the hotels. So it was a really fun job in trying to improve the quality of the sustainability initiatives in the park. It was great because both the Park Service and the concessionaire who I worked for, Zentera, was really behind it. But it was not just the internal, it was also about getting park visitors to make the connection and to get them to change their behavior, because climate change and issues like pollution, those affect parks too. So we did some really creative stuff. One of the things we opened was a store dedicated to education about how climate change affects wildlife. So we'd have cute stuffed animals like this, but there'd be messaging.
She's holding a stuffed animal.
Yes, sorry. We'd have messaging around the stuffed animal like, yay, this grizzly bear is impacted because of climate change, and you can make a good consumer choice if you want to see grizzly bears in Yellowstone in the future, make good consumer choices. So it was also about getting the park visitor to really understand that if we want wildlife and we want parks to be here in the future, we need to change change our actions at home. That was a great job. The winters were really cold, though. I mean, I'm from Massachusetts, but I'm a California girl at heart. 20 below for weeks. Oh, no. And then I was the vice president CFO for, it's now named the Yosemite Conservancy, so the nonprofit that helped support Yosemite either through capital projects, like they just finished last week. They reopened the Mariposa Grove, which was...
So it is open again now.
Yeah, it is opening. That was like a $40 million renovation, which I can't wait. I haven't been over there to see it yet, mostly because I've been in LA. To education, managing the park educational bookstores. So that was a great job. I was there for almost a decade. So just had amazing jobs. And I think most people can do that if, again, you attach that value system to it, that makes sure the company you're working for, even if they're a corporation or business, at least has some of your values, whatever that may be, attached to it.
There's an interesting thing with nature and with wildlife where it seems like once people kind of look at it, they recognize like an inherent value in it, whether they thought there was one or not. But there is still like this social disconnect where a person can go somewhere like Yosemite and they could spend a week there and they could think it's the greatest place on earth, and then they will throw their ice cream wrapper on the ground on the way out, or break several regulations in the park, like stop and photograph bears that they shouldn't be photographing, and various other things. And there's just this disconnect that they don't realize that these things can have an impact far beyond what it seems like is completely impactless in their action. So what sort of things do you do to try to combat that? Because you've mentioned education multiple times, and I imagine trying to get people to understand those disconnects has got to be a large part of your outreach.
Right. My whole approach to my work has changed radically, I'd say, in the past 10 years. It's how do you get people to value something? We have less success with the word education, and I don't want all the teachers in my education department to get mad, because that is vital. We need educational processes, we need educational materials, but those are almost for people already down the road of a value system.
Right. It sounds like homework, and so you have to already want to do the homework to agree to do it. Right.
So what I have really shifted to is you have to first inspire people to care and to value something. And then that stuff, you don't even have to really work that hard at that point. This mountain lion work we're doing down here has been, I think, proof that this can really work. And it's because I think as environmentalists or conservationists or whatever-ist you are, or whatever you're trying to change, we kind of forget why people do care and why they get involved. You know, I bet if you asked yourself, like, why did you get interested in the outdoors or the environment, or why did you become an advocate for wildlife or the environment? It wasn't because somebody, when you were in second grade, said, oh, you're a bad person because you're littering, climate change is killing the planet, or the Clean Water Act's important because you're a polluter. Now, those are all true statements and important ones, but you got probably engaged in the outdoors or started liking wildlife because something captured your imagination. For me, I had frogs in my backyard when I was little, and I used to love those frogs. And then I would, again, read these books like Wind in the Willows or Watch Born Free. We tend to skip that step these days. And for kids that miss that value system, the approach to adults be, well, you're bad, so you have to fix something. So again, I've really been focused more on trying to inspire action by getting people to love something first. That's really been the approach to the work we do, not just in LA with the Cougars, but all the work we do in California. And this is different than the other regions. We focused on urban areas, getting people really jazzed and excited about what they have in their urban area. So in LA, it's this wonderful P22 who happened to march into the middle of the city, and you see how it's captured people's imaginations who normally wouldn't be excited about wildlife. We have people that give to this campaign who's never given to NWF or wildlife organizations before. But more importantly for me, like I'm in the schools a lot, you have kids. This one parent told me their little boy thinks P22 is a superhero, and he puts a cape on and he walks around saying, I'm P22 and this is how I solve things. So you're actually getting people to be comfortable with admittedly a dangerous predator in their midst, although the risk is so low, and to connect with the native wildlife in a way that they haven't. And I'm not going to have to worry about them at 20. They're going to vote for environmental candidates. They're going to support environmental efforts. But it's also fun, we talk a lot about kids, but to see the adults also rally around. Again, people who follow P22 and who are supporting this wildlife crossing, they're not, you have the usual environmental suspects, but these are people who normally this is off their radar. And that is a lesson, because this crossing that we're working on, people have been talking about trying to do something here for 20, 30 years. They knew something had to be done, but they talked about it in very scientific terms, ecosystem resiliency and biodiversity increase. And of course, anybody outside the environmental community is like, snore, who gives a crap? You get this mountain lion on the scene who is lonely, dateless, and trapped. And now you have a story that everybody can relate to, because who can't relate to being dateless, right?
Yeah, and let's explain this a little bit more in case people are unclear. Let's let everyone know what P22
yes,
is.
That's a good point.
And the wildlife crossing specifically that you're talking about, which is the campaign that you've mentioned. So let's give people a little backstory on P22.
Point, yeah. P22 really, he's got an amazing story, again, that really changed my approach and view of conservation. As I told you, most of my career I had spent in national parks. And many who came up in my generation and was schooled in conservation, this is, you put the wildlife in places like Yosemite and you check the box. You saved them, and people belong in cities and wildlife don't.
Everything's separate.
Everything's separate. Keep the
We're
two.
somehow part of an ecosystem that depends on each other, but we should be separated.
And of course, now I see the ridiculousness of that. Wildlife doesn't see city boundaries. And of course, why would you want to keep people separated from wildlife, right? So I'd just taken this job. I had read the story of P22 in 2012 in the LA Times. And I first thought it was like, although fake news wasn't a term back then, I first was like, there's no way that's true. There's no way a mountain lion's living in the middle of LA. Like, that's just not. But I called up the National Park Service biologist who's named in the story, Jeff Sikich, who's amazing. He's doing groundbreaking work along with his partner Seth Riley on the research on urban cats. It's never really been done before. I mean, mountain lions have been studied in rural areas. But I called him up, and he was gracious enough to take me around in Griffith Park, where P22 had ended up. P22 had grown up here in the Santa Monica Mountains, which they know from DNA testing, but he traveled, who knows how many miles by the crow flies, it's about 40, to find a new home, and ended up crossing the 101 and the 405 to end up in Griffith Park, which is 8 square miles, tiny for a mountain lion. Mountain lion's usual male mountain lion range is on average 200 square miles.
And for those unfamiliar with Los Angeles, the Santa Monica Mountains and Griffith Park, despite being, you said, about 40 miles apart, right? What's in between them is a huge congested city and very little green space. Right. And when you mention things like the 405 freeway and the 101, these are huge freeways.
Yes.
These aren't 2-lane freeways with a few occasional vehicles. These are 8 to 12 lane freeways full of trucks and vehicles at all hours of the night and day.
So yeah, you just hit on it. He made this astounding journey. To me, what I love about wildlife, they just continue the wonderment, the amazement that they just do things you never think they would do. So yeah, he walks through places like Beverly Hills, Bel Air. He's within 2 miles of the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and he makes it. As someone who has retraced his route or likely route almost 10 times now, I can't believe I'm not dead. I don't know how he made it.
There were no reports of him doing it either,
no,
right?
That's
no
the
one
other
said,
thing.
hey, there's a really big
Nobody
animal
saw
in
him.
the street.
Mountain lions are nicknamed ghost cats. They are masters of stealth. So I just love that we think we know everything, but yet a mountain lion can creep through the most densely populated urban region in America and make it to Griffith Park without anybody noticing. And if it wasn't for remote cameras, we still might not know he was there. But yeah, so he makes this journey and gets to Griffith Park, and we celebrate him because, oh my God, he's been there since 2012. He coexists. He shows that mountain lions are not waiting in the woods trying to eat us. He coexists with,
If it walked through the entire city and didn't eat a single person, I think that says a lot.
He doesn't see us as prey. In fact, there's some great footage. I think Miguel Ordiana, the scientist who first discovered as part of a study the first photos of P22, he's a great guy who works for the Natural History Museum. He's got some great footage of P22 on the camera where, for some reason, it's like 5 a.m. He's sitting, and so the camera's taking a few photos, and he's sitting within view of the camera. And then you see him move, and then about 5 seconds later, a jogger goes by. So that jogger never knew. But it just shows he doesn't see us as prey. And I can never say P22 wouldn't attack somebody. I could never say any wildlife won't. But the risk is so low. If you really are worried about your own safety, don't get on the 101. Mountain lions have killed, by some estimation, some of the early reports we don't know, is 6 people in California in 100 years, which of course is terrible when it happens, but 6 people in 100 years, step ladders have killed more. So you just have to put the risk in perspective.
I am
and
considering passing legislation to remove step ladders from all of Los Angeles.
Exactly. We get in car accidents, which you look at the stats on that. My God. Just in LA alone, you're talking hundreds a year are killed. So worry about your car. Don't worry about being attacked by a mountain lion so much. But he's shown he can coexist. You have millions of people that visit that park a year. So he's this great poster child. He made this journey. He's living in this circumstance we just can't imagine a mountain lion is. But he's not a success story. He's trapped. He has probably figured out, because if you look at Griffith Park, and for those those of you not in California listening, we say the for all our freeways because they are sacred. There's the 134 north of Griffith Park, the 5 on the east, and the 101 on the west. And then below him is Hollywood. He's not getting through there. It's too dense. So
that might be the most dangerous place
exactly,
for a mountain lion.
Yeah, or a cougar, right? So he's trapped. I think he's figured out, you know what, there's plenty of deer here, and I'm not doing those freeways again. When we've retraced these routes, we've used bridges, but I've stood there and watched the traffic even at 2 a.m. running across 10 lanes of traffic. I mean, what a brave animal. I wouldn't do it. But he's trapped. He's never going to have a girlfriend. And he's never going to pass on these incredible genetics of his. What he's done quite effectively is illustrate what's happening to all his relatives in the Santa Monica Mountains, which is genetic isolation. Which, again, when the scientists talk about it, they'd use very technical terms with everybody. Now they're like, oh, I get it. He's a dateless mountain lion. He'll never have a girlfriend. Oh, right. That's the problem. And that's what's happening is in this entire Santa Monica Mountains, the 101 freeway has essentially become a unpenetrable wall. So you have a population south of the freeway that cannot get out for the most part, and then new blood north of the freeway can't get in. Most mountain lions who try it die. And so what you're seeing is a lot of inbreeding. So the mountain lions that do live here, like some kittens a couple months ago or whenever it was released, the father was the female's grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and great-great-great-grandfather, right? So you're seeing what the scientists are showing through their study is the genetics are collapsing, and they modeled, and indeed, if we don't intervene, within 50 years, they will die out because of genetic defects. They just won't be able to breed anymore. The genetics just won't make it work. Much like what the Florida panther went through. What we need to do is we need to help these animals get in and out of this pretty much formidable barrier, which is the freeway, which we didn't think about. Again, back 50 years ago, or whenever the freeway was put in, longer than that, nobody thought about this. We were still in the mind that, oh, if we have an island of habitat over here and an island of habitat over here for wildlife, we're good. But science now shows us it doesn't work. Islands don't work. Animals need large-scale connectivity. And mountain lions who have large habitats especially, they're going to feel the most acute effects of this sooner, which is what we're seeing with this study. But what these same scientists are showing is this is causing the same problems in salamanders and birds. This isolation, they are slowly genetically declining and becoming isolating as well. And anybody who studied Darwin, even in middle school, knows isolation's not good.
Even in humans, there are examples of times where the gene pool has been made extremely shallow and it leads to extremely sickly people who cannot compete with those outside of their community.
And that's what's going on with these cats. The study showed that they have at best 50 years before they genetically collapse. But what that doesn't take into account is we're in an urban area and these cats face other urban threats, again, like getting hit by a car. So when you think of the entire Santa Monica Mountains and even to Ventura, to where P22 lives, and Griffith Park, and Griffith Park is the terminus of the Santa Monica Mountains, if you look at habitat size and prey density, there's probably 10 to 15 cats at any one time in this area. When you start pulling out the dominant males, like there's 3, and 2 get hit by a car, you're talking game over much quicker. Or cats down here, another big problem is rat poison, which we could do a whole show on why that's bad. We've had several cats in the National Park Service study that have died from rat poison exposure. P22 himself almost died from it. They were able to treat him, but he may not be so lucky next time. So you have all these other urban threats that could make this game over much quicker. But there's good news here. Like, people actually want to do something about this. And his story has inspired that and build this wildlife crossing, which will be what they've identified as the best area to do this on the 101, to get animals across. It's the only place where there's still protected space on both sides. It's the last 1,600 feet, I think, of where that actually can happen. We are underway to build what is probably going to be the largest wildlife crossing in the world. Not because I want it to be the largest. I would love it to be the smallest. I'd probably get more sleep. But it's because it's the biggest freeway in the world.
Well, if things go well, it could become the smallest because others are being built that are larger.
Yeah, exactly. And getting back to your original question, like how do you show people the impact of trash? I think when you put it in the context of real impacts. Like that person is not a bad person. They probably don't know that if a squirrel got a hold of that and if there was plastics in it and a bird got a hold of it, you're probably spelling the death for those animals. And I think that's what happened here is nobody really paid attention to the need to do something until, oh, the lonely mountain lion. That is sad. We love mountain lions. We don't want them to die. So yeah, this project's exciting. It's a public-private partnership. National Wildlife Federation, we got involved as one of the late partners. They've been talking again about doing something for a while, and agencies like the Park Service has done the research, and the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy have preserved the land. Caltrans, obviously, it's their road. They want to do it, but the thing that was missing is Caltrans is like, we'll do it We just need the money. And that's what's exciting about this one. I don't have to fight anybody. The land's protected. Everybody's in. It's just about people writing checks. That's easy. Even a $60 million project, that's easy.
One of the things that you're trying to do is build essentially what is an overpass, correct,
right,
over the 101. But what people might imagine is that's just a bridge, but it'll be its own park in a sense, right? This would be as if it was an extension of a park that went above a major freeway.
Yeah, Clark Stevens, who works for the Resource Conservation District, who has been a part of the project team, I love how he puts it. You're putting the nose in the mountain back. You're essentially putting in land that you dug up. So yeah, these aren't just bridges. Anybody who's listening, just Google wildlife crossings worldwide. They're beautiful. You have a structure under it, but you are connecting that green space, connecting the landscape, which we know is so vital. I mean, we use mountain lions a lot because they get attention. And of course, they are the species most acutely affected by this. But you're basically reconnecting an ecosystem, which helps all wildlife and vegetation. I mean, especially with things like climate change, even plants need to be able to move to survive, right? Isolation does not help with any challenge that plants or animals are facing. Fire. If you can't move, if you're an animal that can't get out of the fire zone, much like people, connectivity is just so important for everything. So yeah, this is going to be this beautiful green space connected over the freeway. And what you have to do so wildlife will use it, and this is the good news, like wildlife crossings are not new. The U.S. is not as far along as places like Belgium and the Netherlands. I mean, they've been doing these things for 20, 30 years. There are some in the U.S. Montana has some, Nevada, Wyoming. You think those states, well, they're not really environmental. But again, this shows this is such a bipartisan, we don't agree on a lot of things in this country. Most people agree that wildlife is good. Most people agree that they love wildlife. They may show it differently. And so it just shows some of these states you wouldn't think of as environmental, these crossings have gone up first. And some of that has to do with the ungulate migrations there, human safety. You get way more vehicle accidents when you have these vast elk herds. And so some of these are intervening, but it's also because they want to help wildlife get across the road. So yeah, Google these, look at photos. We're really catching up. And this, I think it's great that the U.S. is now, in California, probably going to have the largest in the world. But what's different with this one too is not just that it's bigger, it's that this has never been attempted in this urban setting. You look at these, and I've toured a lot of them. I mean, these are out in the middle of nowhere. I toured one in Wyoming. The DOT guy there was telling me that they get a lot of traffic, 10,000 cars a year. And I was like, we have 100,000 cars a day that use the 101 right here. So because of that, there's things we're going to have to do here that they wouldn't have to do in rural Wyoming. First of all, one of the reasons the price tag is, I don't necessarily consider it high given the hundreds of millions been spent to protect land and what I know of other transportation projects. But one of the things that does make this a little more complex to design engineering is you look at these crossings elsewhere, they are a straight shot across the freeway because they pick the easiest place to engineer it. Here, we only have one choice and they're going to have to angle it and slope it. So it becomes a really complex engineering project. But the other thing is the 101 freeway never gets quiet. So we have to put, which you don't see on these other ones, some you do, but these sound vegetated walls so that they really don't think they're going on the road. People ask, can you save money and only make it 4 feet wide? You can't, because the wildlife are not going to use a slim corridor like that. There's science behind for every foot long it is, you have to widen it. So again, they have to be comfortable in thinking that it is part of the landscape to use these things. And that becomes more difficult when you're talking about the 101, which never stops and has 100,000 cars a day. So it's interesting, a lot of the unique features of this, which is great because it's going to set a precedent. You're looking at the site of some really important scientific study for how to make these work in other cities.
So what sort of feedback are you getting from the community, both from individuals and from organizations and from, say, the state itself?
Right. This is both the hardest project I've ever worked on, mainly because of the price tag, but in some respects, it's been the most inspiring and the easiest because there really isn't people to fight. Usually you'd have to fight over the land or people don't want to do this, but the reception's been, in my mind, unprecedented. And, I've worked obviously with the National Park Service for most of my career. And usually when you go to public meetings on things like this, you'll get about 50% are for and 50% are against. The public meetings on this wildlife crossing, the first one we had that Caltrans did as part of the public process, nobody spoke up against. There's 400 people there. The comments on the final EIR, I forget the exact numbers, but it was 8,000 comments with 15 opposed. The support of the community, City of Agoura Hills, where the crossing is, they're in. They passed a city resolution saying we're supportive supportive of this. Every city around here has passed that. The Southern California Association of Governments, which represents tens of millions of cities around Southern California, passed a resolution. Mayor Garcetti loves this project. He mentioned it in his last State of the City or whatever they call that. And then the general public, which to me is even more important. It inspires people. I do school talks. We have P22 Day in Griffith Park. 5,000 people showed up. More importantly to me, we worked in the LA school district and some of the other districts, and kids studied wildlife crossings and the mountain lions. And then at P22 Day, they had models they had built. It's not that there's no opposition, but it's pretty slim. It tends to focus on two things. One is, this is California, and one of the other reasons that this is not as heavy a lift as it would be elsewhere is California is the only state in the country where mountain lions cannot be hunted for sport. And that was passed in 1990 by Prop 117. But the history of mountain lion protections, again, very bipartisan. Ronald Reagan got involved. It was just something, a shared value of California. So what you have here is most people in the state, time and again, prove that they want mountain lions on the landscape, regardless of whether they're dangerous or not, that they are part of the landscape. And that's been voted by ballot measure. When P22, those of you who don't know, he lives in Griffith Park, and he one day happened to, the LA Zoo is in Griffith Park, munch on a koala bear. God, pick the cutest animal in the world. And, I just was actually giving a talk at the LA Zoo, and I was thanking them because any other state in the country, this cat would have been shot or removed immediately upon detection, okay? But I will say, when he eats a cute animal like a koala, I remember that morning going, in my whole career, never thought I'd be issuing a statement about a mountain lion in Los Angeles eating a koala bear, but sure enough. But it was interesting watching again that values had changed, because what happened? A couple people at first were like, get that cat out of there, he's dangerous, he ate a koala bear, which it's not that he looked like a raccoon to him. He didn't,
It may have been the first time in history that those two animals have had the opportunity
it
for that
was.
interaction.
I think it was the first time, they don't exist on the same continent. So yeah, both of them made history, and hopefully the koala feels, even in his being killed, he at least, went down in the record books. But it was really wonderful watching this because, a couple people early, were posting on Facebook and, writing letters, and he should be. But no, the majority of people, you watch the LA Times in an editorial, he stays. Ted Lieu and a lot of the city council members were like Paul Koretz, and others were like, hey, no, that cat belongs there. It was marvelous to watch. People were writing in, 10-1 letters to the LA Times. No, he's not more dangerous, and indeed he belongs there. The koala doesn't belong there. But most notably, the LA Zoo, the director, was wonderful. He came out and said, our bad, our fence wasn't big enough, we'll do better, not P22's fault. And I thought that was a wonderfully progressive view for a zoo to take, and they are, and to also recognize that the native wildlife was important. So again, it gets back to that, these values have really changed. That was a long lead into that. I think the opposition really comes down to, there are some people who don't think mountain lions should ever be on this landscape. And I'm never going to convince them otherwise. Luckily in California, because of this value system, that's not a lot of people. But those people I can't convince. What I can only present as the facts is this crossing is not going to bring more mountain lions. Mountain lions are already here, and mountain lions are extremely self-regulating. You're never going to have an overpopulation of mountain lions. These guys are solitary creatures who fight to the death. The reason P22 had to leave is because the dominant male at the time would have eaten them. So they're extremely self-regulating. So this is not going to bring more mountain lions. It's just going to ensure that they continue in the future. That one I can't really convince people who are just dead set against predators, but luckily it's the few. The other opposition I think is, oh my God, you're spending $60 million in taxpayer money. I mean, my God, there's hospitals that need fixing and roads, and that's one of the reasons National Wildlife Federation, the organization, committed to raising the majority of the money for this through private funds. So we have people like Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation who gave, and the Annenberg. So we're really going after private dollars here. The only public funds we are using are funds that have to be spent on conservation. They are earmarked, you can't change them. But for the most part, we're asking the philanthropic community to step up and put their money here so that we aren't taking away from other projects. Most of the people who come in on that side, like, you're wasting money, once it's like, oh, well, you're not wasting taxpayer money, and yeah, Leo has the right to give to whoever he wants. So that's mainly, I'd say, where we've gotten opposition. But for the most part, and this is why people like Leo and the Annenberg have given, they've seen the grassroots support for this. This isn't just three environmentalists saying this has to be done. This is an entire region saying we want to do this for mountain lions, combined with the science saying this is necessary.
So what is keeping it from happening? Is it strictly that it costs $60 million and $60 million haven't been raised yet?
Well, right now, nothing. For $60 million, I like to divide this into 4 phases. I mean, this thing is underway, so it's not that it's stopped. But yes, what could stop it is money. So the 4 phases, and these are all phases that Caltrans has to do for a project. So the first one had to do a feasibility study. The MRCA and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy funded that. Done. Second phase, the environmental documents, which is, gets to 30% engineering. That's the phase we just finished. And Save LA Cougars campaign funded that through donations, through the State Coastal Conservancy put up $1 million, all through the effort. So that's thanking everybody for stepping up and donating. Done. And that's where most projects die. You talk to crossing projects across, they can't get through the environmental documents because the catch-22 is you have people that'll give to construct, like bricks and mortar, but they don't want to do the planning, right? They want to make sure it's going to go. So that's done. The next phase, which Caltrans is underway right now, is the final design and engineering. So I call it the blueprints phase. It's literally, you will have the blueprints. They're starting that to keep them on track. So to have no delays, we have to raise $10 million by the end of the year, and we're at 3.7, so we're getting there. We'll get them that money, and we're already working on construction dollars. We then have to raise the balance for construction, which is about 40 to 50. I never say easy when I talk about a $60 million project, but that's 2 people writing $25 million checks to get their name on it.
Listeners out there, if you've got spare $25 million,
you can get your name on this crossing.
Yeah, we can help you make that happen.
Yes, no problem. We do have recognition for lower levels if you're like me and can't afford that check. But that is, once you have the blueprints, the fundraising becomes less challenging because the project's ready. And plus, naming opportunity for 100,000 cars a day. But yeah, so it's underway, and really at this point, the most significant obstacle to stop this is we don't meet our fundraising targets.
So people listening that are interested in this, what can they do to find out more about it and get involved? And maybe you should mention the little cuddly creature sitting in your lap.
I know, my new support animal. So if you want to get involved, www.savelacougars.org is the official website. There's an email newsletter you can sign up for. I won't spam you. It comes from me. If you want to help volunteer, if you want to donate, of course. With this, we've done creative things, again, that get at both fundraising, but also that value system change and getting people more comfortable with native wildlife. Things that we've developed, like the one you're talking about, who's sitting on my lap. This is a custom P22 plush toy, which I can't stop hugging because...
She has sincerely been hugging it the entire time we've been talking.
It's true. Well, it just feels so good. Now, most of us would love to hug P22 in real life, but realize that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, you may regret it.
Yeah, you may regret it. Please don't try that at home, kids. But you can hug this one. He comes with his own collar and P22 tag. This is just an example of one of the things we do to help raise money. And the other, I have a P22 t-shirt on. So on that site, you can also go to our store. We have Cougars of LA trading cards. We have P22 cast paw prints. And 100% of the proceeds for all these things go right back into the campaign. So just to give you some idea, like this P22 plush, he's not available yet. The one I'm holding is the only one in existence. Just takes a long time to produce these things. He'll be available in October at P22 Day, which you should mark your calendars, October 27th, Griffith Park. 5,000 people came last year. Lots of fun exhibits on wildlife. We have bands. Quezal, the great LA band, is performing again. But these will be available for sale starting then. If we sell all of them, we raise $50,000 for the wildlife crossing. It's not 60 million, but it all adds up. Plus, you get this wonderful toy. We have some fun t-shirts and other items. But my other favorite is the Cougars of LA trading cards. They're a set of 50 that have the biographies of the mountain lions and the study, so you can learn more about them. And we also donate those to schools so they can use them for education.
P22 and this wildlife crossing have become very large passion projects for you, and they have led to things such as what I watched last night, which was your TEDx talk.
Oh, yeah.
And you either recently have or are about to release a book.
It's
correct?
out. Yeah, it already came out. Yep.
So tell us about those two projects and how those came about.
The shift for me from thinking of wildlife as only appropriate in a Yellowstone or Yosemite, that it actually wildlife actually should be in human spaces. It just changed my philosophy so much that it did become a passion, not only to save mountain lions, or I do wildlife work across the state. In fact, my fox and porpoise scientists, Bill and Bill, would be very mad at me right now. You always talk about the cougars. They always get the attention. In fact, when P22 ate the koala bear, Bill Kinnear, who works on this project with Golden Gate Cetacean Research, he emailed me, our porpoises would never do anything like that. But
I don't know. If we threw a koala into a pool with a porpoise, we might find out otherwise. otherwise.
Yeah, I guess we should test that theory. But yeah, it did lead to some really trying to get people thinking this way. And I think my ideas just started resonating. And that's where I got invited to do the TEDx talk. And then Heyday Books, who I worked with in Yosemite for years, Malcolm, who's a good friend and founder, he's like, there's a book in this. And of course, P22 is the cover, but it's about this sort of new model of coexistence across the state and things that are going on. And both the TED Talk sort of mirrors it, where it's not only P22, you have marine bases being stewards to desert tortoises. You have the Facebook campus, who has made a home for Facebook foxes, all the way up to Mark Zuckerberg, who supports this. Foxes showed up, and most companies would have been like, well, they're a pest, let's get them off. And they're like, well, can we just keep them? You just see example after example of this happening across the state that I thought were, again, instead of writing a book about how bad everybody's doing, let's just celebrate what's possible, which is both the TED Talk and the book. And the book, by the way, my father told me I was crazy, but our royalties go back to the conservation work. I don't get any royalties. It was important to me that it was, not so much profit for me, but let's give it back to the wildlife. But what's been great is people have said it's changed their view, because this is so indoctrinated in us that wildlife shouldn't be in human spaces. For example, when I did my TEDx talk, I worked in Yosemite, and my home, although I'm almost never there, is up outside Yosemite. Yosemite is a really important place in my life. I was married there, I was engaged there, and it's just been a part of my life for so long. One of the scientists I'd known for 20 years was watching my TED Talk, and she came up to me afterwards. She's like, oh my God, everything you said went against everything I'm trying to do in my work. I try to keep the people in Yosemite away from wildlife, and they shouldn't be. She's like, studies even show that wildlife are more stressed around people or in developed areas. I was like, well, I'm more stressed in a city. I mean, who isn't? But does that mean they shouldn't be there? Because you wouldn't tell a person if they're more stressed, they don't have a right to live. And indeed, what you're seeing is animals are adapting. It's us who have the hang up. Right? It's us who are like, you shouldn't be there. But there's this whole field now of evolution of urban wildlife. It actually is sort of changing these animals, not just personality-wise, but actually they're adapting in ways that then get passed on so that they can survive. Because they have to. We're paving over this world, and I don't see us putting aside too many more national parks. But if it's good enough for P22, and that's the way wildlife stays, then we got to get over our hang-up. So it was important to me to really keep getting these ideas out there, because really what was at stake here was if we kept this thinking that wildlife could only be in these places, the wildlife weren't going to have a future. But to me, the other point, which I don't know if it comes across as strong in the book and the TED Talk, but which is just as important to me, is that if we tell people the only way you can really access wildlife and nature is to go to Yosemite, how elitist and how inaccessible. As a kid, having that access to nature, which wasn't perfect, it was the power lines and the sewage plant, but that got me through a lot of, I had a great childhood, nothing terrible, but I'd go out there, and if I was sad, it would make me happy. To not connect kids and people to what is here, and there's a lot of nature in LA that people ignore, that's denying them that same, to me, almost a fundamental right of having access to the natural world. And it's honestly becomes almost a social justice issue as well, that, there's no one right answer here. White males have dominated how conservation should be looked at and how wildlife should be looked at for such a long time, but we need to be open to other views. And if someone feeding a squirrel or the ducks in a local park, as long as it's approved food, is just as legitimate natural experience as me seeing a bear in Yosemite, or having a hummingbird in your feeder in an apartment balcony, just as legitimate as me having a mountain bluebird in my 6 acres up there. So I think that to me has become just as important, to make wildlife and nature accessible, and not something that only if you have the money to get to a Yosemite that you have access to. What gets to the core of it and why that is so important is on P22 Day, the first year, we had a group of kids from Esperanza Elementary. These kids are in the most dense part of the area that you can think of in LA. They don't have access to a lot of nature. But Brad Rumble, who's just revolutionary in this work, he's converting schoolyards. He did it at Leo Politi to green space. These kids also, at a lot of these schools, 30% of them have undocumented parents. So the trials I had as a kid, there maybe a boy didn't like me where I go to nature. These kids are going home not knowing if their parents are going to be there, right? So they are facing things I can't even. And so these schoolyard habitats have gone in, and it's bringing them such joy. Like a burrowing owl showed up, and one of the kids discovered it, and they're writing stories about burrowing owls. But one of the classes from there read at P22 Day, and a little boy, this is like a 3rd grader, got up, "Dear P22," and he said a lot of stuff. I hope you get a girlfriend. And he's like I was standing with a bunch of scientists. And again, I bash scientists a lot, but I do have a biology undergrad. Science is important, and I am a scientist, but we also have to have the emotional side. But this little boy says, "I'm sorry you're scared and lonely and sad. I've been there before." This is a 3rd grader. And we all look at each other and just like burst into tears. And so to me, like that illustrates, I think, something I'm not quite good at getting at is that this work's essential to save animals and wildlife, but it's also essential for people. I think that a fundamental connection to wildlife is something we should all share, whether you have the luck of birth to be born in a rural area or be born in LA. And I think that gets at a lot of the issues going on in the world right now too. Yeah,
I would say also choosing to aid a creature that holds no power over you, but that your decisions can hold power over. Choosing to do the thing because you think it's the thing you should do, that can change a person in a way that they don't foresee.
That's a really good point.
I feel like there's a quote or something that I can't recall, but it's not your interactions with authority figures that defines you. Mm-hmm. It's your interaction with things you hold authority over.
Oh, that's really, again, so relevant for today too. And you're right, because that's the thing with wildlife. We have immense power over their lives. As you said, anything from the candy wrapper we discard without thinking to where we put our roads to what we do in our homes. Like you put up a fence at home. You don't think about, I want a fence. I don't want to see my neighbors, or I want to keep my dog in. You don't think about what that just did for wildlife populations around you, right? So I think most people, once they learn, are like, oh, yeah, I can make accommodations. Sometimes as simple as just putting some small holes in the bottom of the fence so, squirrels or, foxes can walk through your yard. So I agree. We have immense power over wildlife's lives, and usually that ends badly for the wildlife. But I love that there does seem to be this awakening, especially in LA. I mean, we talk about this wildlife crossing being a worldwide model, but it's also the LA value system. When P22 ate that koala, the city rallied around him. The New York Times and the Washington Post both published different stories about what's going on in LA. Like, wow, they're okay with that? And wow, they're really seeing wildlife as part of their lives. And so to me, that's encouraging, because I think we are showing in this area that we are willing to give up some of that power, or at least willing to use some of that power in ways, whether it be, building this crossing or being more accommodating. Like most people that learn about the rodenticide issue, which in a short version is rat poison, terrible thing, especially for wildlife. Rats don't die in those little boxes. They eat it, go out, and then a fox eats that rat, dies, and the mountain lion ate that fox or coyote and then also gets sick. It runs up the food chain in ways. So you're not just killing that one rat. Most people, when they learn, are like, oh my God, I didn't know. And of course change their behavior, right? So I think that the good news is most people are willing to use some of that power. There's certainly a subset that don't. But to me, LA is also setting that model, and it's being recognized that the value system here is so different. In fact, where I live in Yosemite, I will say that the tolerance for mountain lions is much lower than LA. I give talks up there too in my backyard, and I think more people get panicked about mountain lions. And, their claim to me is, well, those LA folks don't have to live with wildlife. Yes, they do. I see more coyotes in LA than I do where I live. And don't tell me they don't have to live with wildlife. 10 million people hike in a park with P22, or the Santa Monica Mountains where there are wildlife. This is, an urban park. I think it's also part of P22's story and how fundamental he's changed people is that LA is also setting this worldwide model, not just for a conservation outcome like the crossing, but for a value shift outcome where a city becomes a place where people and wildlife can coexist, and people do value wildlife enough to change their behavior. It's pretty cool stuff.
Not everyone who listens to this show is on the West Coast, although that is a large portion of it. There are people in other states, some people apparently even in some other countries. And what I would say to all those people is this sounds like an issue that only pertains to Los Angeles and the people that live in Los Angeles. But what I would say you are proposing, and everyone involved in this are proposing, is a model. If this is successful, if this comes to pass and it works as well as advertised and improves the life of wildlife and potentially of residents in Los Angeles, then that becomes a model for other people.
You nailed it. I mean, even the process to getting this, is a model that others can replicate. So I'd say, yeah, both the crossing and again, the value system. And I think what's cool is you are seeing other cities, if not building a 60 million wildlife crossing, like Chicago. Chicago just passed a no-kill. Like, to deal with their coyote problems, they're not going to kill them, which, as we know, scientifically doesn't work anyway. You actually breed more super coyotes who are resilient, right? And we got some nice parrots there.
That's right. We get that. Yeah. We get that ambiance on this show.
Yeah. See, we're outside here in the Santa Monica Mountains. So the whole city has said, you know what? We're not going to solve our problems by killing these coyotes. We're going to step up as people and say, we'll take responsibility and we're going to look at non-lethal ways to coexist with these. We had the International Urban Wildlife Conference in San Diego this last year. The Santa Monica Mountains scientist, Seth Riley, was on the planning committee, and it was great to hear. New York did this whole coexist campaign on their subways. So I think other cities are stepping up too, and again, I think it's because people just fundamentally do want to connect with wildlife. And this was a lesson I will say that Yosemite was really good at. When I worked in Yosemite for a decade, I came on in 1999 to the nonprofit. One of the first projects I worked on was they were having terrible bear issues. For those of us who was following at the time, bears were breaking into cars.
When you say break into cars, they will literally rip a door off of a car.
Exactly. Rip it off, break the glass. They can get in and out in 20 seconds. They know what model cars, how to get in. As visitation increased over the years, bear incidents were increasing. And they were after the food. The only death in Yosemite from an animal is from a deer. Shows you how, the bears just wanted your food. They weren't after people. But of course, that increased the likelihood of a conflict happening. For years, this went on. And in fact, this is one of the chapters in my book. The only solution they had was to kill the bears, which of course didn't solve the problem. New bears just broke in. And I think this is the model, and the model we're sort of using in this urban is that finally it dawned on them, this isn't a bear problem. This is a people problem. We can't expect the bears to behave. Unlike mountain lions, which mountain lions, they're never going to go in our garbage, all right? They might eat our pets and our livestock, but they're not after our Twinkies. They are obligate carnivores, it's a technical term, which means they will never go after Cheetos in our back seat. But bears will. They have adapted to life and have been very successful over eons because they eat anything. And in fact, our human food is very appealing to them. So it wasn't the bears. They were just doing what bears do. What bears did typically, and most people think bears are meat eaters. They are, but it's actually a small percentage of their diet. They eat fish, they eat carrion, but they'll also eat insects and flowers and, pine nuts. So what bears did successfully over time is if there wasn't a lot of berries, they'd eat pine nuts. And if they couldn't find a lot of fish, they'd switch to insects, right? They were very good at this. So when you introduce this food source into the valley, and you're taking away food sources as development happens outside the park, the bears just doing their successful evolution strategy. I'm going after those burgers. You can't blame the bear. And indeed, once the park shifted their strategy to penalizing the bears, but to telling the people, hey, if you want to visit this park, you're going to have to take some responsibility so that the bears don't get into trouble. Incidents went down to, it went from like almost $600,000. So I think one year recently was down to $7,000. People had to take responsibility. And anybody who visits Yosemite knows, if you stay at a hotel, you have to sign there's no food in your car. You get education coming and going.
Bear boxes at every campground for you to keep anything that might smell like food away from bears.
And I'm about to do the John Muir Trail. I just bought I've had bear canisters, but they have the new lightweight ones. You have, if you're a backpacker, you can't hang your food anymore. You got to put it in these bear canisters. And it worked. And I think also what it was great is that impact. You're saying the visitors then understood how their behavior could impact behavior they might not have thought of. Because who would think leaving a Twinkie in your car could kill a bear?
Or a toothpaste tube.
Yeah, exactly.
Or your deodorant.
Exactly. Nobody, you're not to blame the people. They didn't know. But once they're educated, it really showed that they wanted to step up. So that was really successful. And I think that's really what we're trying to do with this whole urban wildlife movement is that don't kill the mountain lion when he shows up or kill the fox or remove them. Say instead, okay, how can I help this animal coexist? It doesn't work everywhere. I'm not advocating for everybody to open up their backyards to mountain lions. That's not appropriate. But where we can, and there's a lot of places where we can, that's how we need to be thinking. And luckily, again, I think that people really are, especially in LA, but some of these other cities are thinking that way. And that when you work in conservation, especially these days, there's not a lot of good news. And that's something that does inspire me is seeing these people step up and do things. Right here in Calabasas and Agora Hills, people from both communities have stepped up. And there's a group called Poison Free Malibu. And, they've done efforts to ban rat poisons in these areas. You can't totally ban them, but these cities around here have pledged not to use them on their property and things like that. So you really do see people stepping up, and I think that's what inspires me when there is a lot of bad news of species going endangered and public lands being taken away. So that's, there is some hope.
Before we wrap this up, let's tell everyone where they can go to find out more about everything we've talked about, to keep up with you, to get your book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
And I will also post a link to that TEDx talk should someone decide they want to watch that as well.
Okay, thanks. And and I think what you're doing is important because the outdoors is, for me, that is fundamental to the health of people, but also fundamental to being outdoors is the wildlife, right? Would it really be the outdoors if it wasn't linked to the natural world? So I can't say enough about, the efforts to show. And outdoors, you don't have to be a super athlete, right? I'm not. I'm about to hike the Muir Trail, but I'm going to be very slow. When I did it in my 20s.
tired.
Yes. When I did it in my 20s, I'm almost 50, my body was a little not as old. So this will be fun. But being outdoors, I think most of us almost expect to have that connection to wildlife and nature. So I think wherever you can be an advocate, if you're an outdoors person for wildlife and for keeping the natural world, that's important. But to follow me in my work, actually Facebook is I post photos. I'm known for mountain lions, but obviously I have these projects across the state, and yes, you'll see fox and porpoise photos. See,
She's also known for pika poop.
Yes, pika, another one of my favorites. And then my backyard frogs. I love frogs. So Facebook, Beth Pratt-1, that's where I post a lot of photos. I purposely don't keep so much a blog anymore just because it's just so time consuming and people don't actually want to read so much anymore. But I do have a website, bethpratt.com, you can also check out. And then obviously the Save LA Cougars site again, www.savelacougars.org. The other place you should follow is P22 on Facebook. I don't want to give it away, but it is me. I tell people that and they're like, really? I'm like, no, it's really not him. We have fun with that page. We post a lot of mountain lion photos and footage of him. So that's P22 Mountain Lion of Hollywood you can follow.
And so before we go, is there any final thought you'd like to leave everyone with?
Think of coexistence in everything you do in life. I think it all comes down to, if you do value wildlife, almost every action you take has some implication. So I'm not going to tell you you're a bad guy because you drive a sports car. I drive a sports car. I'm not going to tell you you're a bad guy because you take too long a shower. But on the other hand, just, start thinking about the way you are in the world, and if there are things you can do, from even positive things that you're not doing, like planting native milkweed in your backyard, because the monarch populations have declined in some areas 90%. When you're driving on the road, drive slower. One of the problems they're having in Yosemite now with the bears is people are hitting them. It doesn't even need to be big animals. My God, nobody wants to drive with me during the first rains because I go so slow because I don't want to mush the frogs, right? So in everything you do, if you can take a moment and think about how it impacts wildlife and people, of course, that's going to be a big help in the world. And there are some simple things you can do that will make a difference for wildlife, like even if you live in an apartment balcony, planting some milkweed, that will make a world of difference. The other thing I'll end with is try to inspire others. I mean, I think that's really key here, is that the environmental movement, or whatever you want to call it, is not winning right now. I mean, we're having these successes in places, but I'd say what's alarming to me is my life's work, and anybody working in this field, is being disbanded at a really alarming rate right now. So just be aware of that and do what you can to inspire others to take action, because we don't want to lose these areas that are essential to experiencing the great outdoors for either people or for wildlife.
All right, Beth, thank you very much for meeting me here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
And hopefully everyone is going to run out now and go get a stuffed P22. I know Erica is going to want one of those.
Yes, they are. And hope to see you P22 Day, October 27th, Griffith Park.
All right, thanks again.
Cool. Thank you.
So just a quick reminder to all of you in the Los Angeles area that P22 Day is October 27th in Griffith Park. So if you are in the area or intend to be in Los Angeles, October 27th is a good time to head to Griffith Park. And now would be a great time to head to our brand new, newly revamped website, gogetoutside.com. Look for this episode 69 with Beth Pratt-Bergstrom, and there you will find a number of things, including a multitude of links to things such as an article about the 4 new Cougar kittens that were recently found in the Santa Monica Mountains. They are collectively known as P70 through P73. You can read all about those cats there on our website, or find links to all of the other things we spoke about in this episode, including ways you can donate to the Save LA Cougars campaign and help build that wildlife overpass. A link to a documentary that features Beth called The Cat That Changed America. Or if you were interested in turning your yard or balcony or some area of your home into a certified wildlife habitat, you'll find a link that will provide that information for you. And you will find a number of photographs of Beth, but by her insistence, mostly photographs of cougars in the LA area, and her TED Talk, where she speaks more on the topics that we discussed in this podcast. And if you should wish to get in touch with us here at the show, there are a number of ways you can do that. You can send us an email, go@butcherbirdstudios.com. If you can't remember that, you can always go to that newly revamped website I've mentioned 45 times this episode and click on the email icon at the top of the page, or go to the contact page. Or if you would rather dial a telephone, call us up and leave a message, you can do that, 818-925-0106. And a wonderful way for us all to celebrate the return of the Go Get Outside podcast for its 4th season would be to run to your podcast purveyor of choice, subscribe to the show, rate the show, review the show, and please share it with someone who you adore. This episode of the Go Get Outside podcast was edited by Griffin Davis. It was produced and recorded with additional editing by me, your host, Jason Milligan. We would like to give a very special thanks to Rosalind Helfand, who helped make this episode happen. And as always, it has been brought to you by Butcherbird Studios. Next time on the show, come back October 1st for a roundtable discussion about the Community Science Program at the Natural History Museum of LA County. Find out how that museum has began including the general community in their research projects and how you too can get involved. Come back October 1st, Community Science. See you then.